Hi everyone, I have some really important things that I've been wanting to talk about, and I just want to start by talking a little bit more about the Jubilee. There's actually another calculation that I came up with that I wanted to share. Okay, before I get into it, I just want to explain something so you can understand why I believe that God actually spoke to Pastor Sandy Armstrong. Because some time ago I had come up with this timeline for Daniel's prophecy. This was before I had seen any of Pastor Sandy Armstrong's videos, and I had actually made a video about the Jubilee year and why I believe it had to end with the number 7, why the Jubilee year always ends with the number 7, and why I believe the prophecy, Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, was all about Shavuos. And I believe I had made a 4-part video at the time explaining all of this information. And then I decided to make out a timeline because I thought it would be easier to actually see the information in a timeline that I had just finished explaining. I think it was like a 4-part video that I had done explaining all of this information, and I thought it would be a lot easier just to type it all out into a timeline. And so I developed this timeline over here, which I had explained in my videos, and I can't take the time to explain it all over again, but basically what I believe this timeline proves is that the prophecy in the book of Daniel is based on the number 27. Daniel is the 27th book of the Bible, and it's in Daniel 9:27 where the prophecy culminates, where the Messiah confirms the covenant. And so I've made several videos talking about the importance of the number 27 and what I believe it represents. Okay, and I just want to say that at the time I didn't even know that Daniel was the 27th book of the Bible, but you can see that right here. And as I said, it was in Daniel 9:27 where the prophecy culminates, where the Messiah confirms the covenant. And I've talked about how it's in verse 27 in all of the Gospels when Jesus comes back in all of his glory to gather the saints. It comes up in verse 27 in all of the Gospels. And so I've made several videos about the number 27 and how I did a table that seemed to verify that it correlates with the Hebrew year 5777 and the year 2017, because I put in the numbers 27 in the Bible code, came up with 117 matches, which matches with Psalm 117, and 117, if you add the 2 ones, that makes 27. And the very first line that came up in the matrix was the fact that Lamech lived for 777 years. So it had 777 years right at the very first line. It had 777 years. And then the very last line in the matrix said that God would not strive with man for more than 120 years, and this would be the end of the 120th Jubilee. And so I don't believe that was all by accident. I believe the Bible code confirmed it. Unfortunately, they took Bible code off the wisdom, so I can't quickly just pull up the Bible code like I used to be able to show you that as proof, but I've made several videos about it. And so what I discovered when I made this timeline is that, and I discovered this by accident because first all I had was the Gregorian dates, and I had come up with these dates back in 2009. I had actually made a comment in a forum, in a private message, about these dates. I actually had to go back and look at it because I couldn't remember what it was that I had discovered about the Jubilees, and I wanted to look it up, and that's where I saw these dates. But it was just the Gregorian dates that I had come up with where important events happened in the Jubilee year. Okay, and then what I did more recently when I made my video is I had converted those dates to the Hebrew dates and noticed that there was a pattern that alternated between the numbers 77 and 27 for the Jubilee years. I had no idea at the time because they were in the Gregorian dates, all these Jubilee years that I had come up with, which are these years right here, the years in the red. And so I didn't have this part over here, did not exist in my timeline, which is the date of creation. I had thought about arbitrarily just coming up with a date, but I didn't think it could be verified, so I thought there was no point in that. And so the very first date on this timeline that I had was the Exodus, which was the Hebrew year 2277, which makes the number 27. So it's like the number 27 amplified. And then all the years alternate between the years 27 and 77, ending with the Hebrew year 5777. Okay, and so I had made this timeline, but I had just finished explaining it. And so I didn't know if I should even show this timeline and go over it again. I didn't want to beat a dead horse or anything, and plus the timeline doesn't look very professional, so I just didn't know if I should share it. And I had prayed before I shared this timeline if I should talk about the year 2017 or if I should talk about something else, because I had other things that in mind to talk about, such as DNA. And so I didn't know if I should show this timeline. And so before I got on the computer that day, I prayed whether I should share this timeline, if God could give me a sign, or if I should talk about DNA. And then when I went on my home page, I saw one of Pastor Sandy Armstrong's videos where he was talking about the end being in the year 2017. And so that was the very first video I watched of Pastor Sandy Armstrong's since about 2010, because I actually used to watch Pastor Sandy Armstrong back in 2010 when he was talking about 2010 to 2017 being the last 7 years that God had told him that. But I didn't realize he was making videos again, and so when I saw his video come up, that's when I watched it. But it was right after I had prayed if I should talk about the year 2017. Okay, and so when I watched his video, he had mentioned how he was able to calculate the date of creation just from the Bible, just from information given in the Bible, that it's actually calculable. And the date that he came up with was 3,983. And in fact, when I watched the first video of his, I didn't really even understand exactly what he was talking about. It was after I had watched maybe 2 or 3 videos that I realized what he was talking about concerning the date of creation. Okay, so what I did, and I'll just show you what I did, I just put in the date that he came up with, which was 3983 BC, just to verify it, to see if that was actually the date of creation, to see if anyone else had done the calculations. And so these links came up, and this is one that shows where someone else had also done the calculations and came up with the year 3983 BC. So I found this link, and then the other link that I clicked on was this one right here. And if you look at this link, you see that the Hebrew year that matches up with 3983 is the year -222. And so that actually fit in perfectly with my timeline. That's why I added it in after I saw that. And as you can see, it makes a perfect 27 with the -222 at the beginning of the timeline and the 777 right at the end. And like I said, I had come to understand that this entire prophecy is all about the number 27. And at the time, I didn't even know that the book of Daniel was the 27th book of the Bible. Okay, so what I wanted to prove and try to understand, and I wasn't even thinking about making a video, I was just trying to do this for myself. I was trying to understand why the years change on the Gregorian. As you can see, that alternate from the year 1767, but then when you go to the BC years, they alternate between the years 34 and 84. And so my theory has been that everything started with the year 17, and just as Pastor Sandy Armstrong talked about in his last video, he said that God told him that everything goes full circle with the 120th Jubilee. Okay, and this is something I've talked about before as well. You can see that I have some videos which even have this image over here as the thumbnail, but I've talked about how it all began with Genesis 2:17 and that it all goes full circle, and how I believe that prophecy is circular. That's something that I've talked about many times before, and that I believe that it all began with 2:17 and that it all ends with 2:17. And I'll show you another example of that, and this is something that Pastor Sandy Armstrong has talked about as well. He's mentioned how there's 6,000s in Revelation 20 through Revelation 20 verse 1 through Revelation 20 verse 7. So that looks like the number 2017, and there's actually 6,000s mentioned in those verses. And then when you go to verse 8, it said, well, actually in verse 7 is where it says, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. And so I've talked about how everything goes full circle back to 2017. And so when the millennium begins, it begins in 2017, but then after the 1,000 years, it goes right back to the beginning. And so I believe that prophecy is written in concentric circles. I've talked about that before, but I believe that it all begins and ends at the same point. So you have like smaller circles and larger circles, so they're not exactly concentric, such as it's more like this, where they have a beginning and ending point. So you have the 1,000 years, and then you have the beginning of the Bible to the very end of the Bible, and you have the 3.5 years. Everything begins and ends at the same point. And then the very next verse talks about Gog and Magog. Of course, there's other scriptures that talk about Satan being cast out in verse 8, such as Luke 10:18, which I've talked about before, and several other scriptures. And so it seems to come full circle. This would be the beginning of the Gog-Magog war in the 3.5 years, but also happens again at the end of the millennium. So I believe at the end of the millennium, it goes right back to somewhere between the years 2017 and 2018, which is where we're at right now. Okay, so that's what I wanted to prove. I wanted to prove that everything begins with the year 17, and that 6,000 years ago would have been the year 17, and then if there was no 4,000 years BC and then 2,000 more years, it would be 6,017 right now. So everything begins with the number 17. Okay, and so when I first tried to do this timeline, I actually put in the Hebrew or the Gregorian year 3,984 BC, and it didn't work out that way. It actually comes up a little differently when you have the beginning date as, or the date entered as being -222 versus the Gregorian year being entered, which is 3983. So when you put it in that way, you see that the beginning year is -222 to -221. And so the new year, 221, would begin on Tishri 1. And so 222 would end at the end of Elul, and then 221 would begin. And so the very first day of 221 would be Tishri 1, which matches up with October 3rd of 3983. Okay, so when you put in October 3rd, 3983 BC to today's date, you actually come up with 5,999 years, 10 months, and 11 days. So it's not quite 6,000 years yet. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out because Pastor Sandy Armstrong was told that it would be just like the days of Noah, and the 600 years represents the 6,000 years.